Hello, a very warm welcome to our first Asia Talk in autumn 2022. It's already season 4 of our talks, and thanks a lot to all of you tuning in. I know it's a very busy and dense time currently. So many things happening, not only the midterms, but 50 years of German-China diplomatic relations, and it's almost the same amount of time for EU's China approach and the tensions rising in other Asian countries when they look to the outcome of the CCP Congress and the upcoming G27 in Indonesia, and currently the COP going on. So there is a lot on everybody's plate. Today, the talk will be Taiwan-China tensions. We have actually to alter the topic just a tiny little bit because Amanda Xiao, who wanted to speak especially about the security issues in terms of looking to Japan, South Korea, and Australia, had unfortunately caught in sick day before yesterday. And as nice as it could be, and we are really lucky that Professor Alfred Wu from the National University of Singapore agreed to jump in, and we will still talk about the takeaways of the 20th Communist Party's Congress from the EU and from the German, a little bit the German perspective. And as Professor Wu took the time to join us today, he will give us an insight, especially on the situation, how it is seen from a Singaporean angle, and provides us with insights how he interprets the outcome of the Congress. Professor Wu was a former journalist in mainland China, and then he left for Hong Kong for more than a decade ago, and then switched to Hong Kong, and where he is now professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University. Thanks so much for tuning in. Professor Wu has only 20 to 25 minutes to stay with us, but nevertheless, I'll take the chance of immediately introducing always to you, also to you, Greg Steck from the Mercator Institute for China Studies in Brussels. And I just learned yesterday how much focus is really put on the EU relations and the reporting and examination of that reason towards China. So Merix has stuffed up his office in Brussels to 3 people by now, which I think is very good news and a strong signal what is really on the plate and what needs to be discussed. We will also touch a little bit, visit Chancellor Scholz to Beijing and how that was perceived and received by the European countries. And of course, we will focus on more issues regarding EU and China relations. But first, the floor is open to Professor Wu, the first 20-25 minutes. If you have any questions, please raise your hand or put your question in the chat. We prefer, actually, due to time constraints, that you put your question into the chat. And I'd like to remind you again that the meeting is recorded. We will give a summary and put the summary on our website in English later on in due course to this session. Professor Wu, I'd like to get your insight and your personal and academic view on the Congress paved, the 20th Congress paved the way for Xi to an unprecedented third term by cementing his core position in the country's leadership. And I'd like to quote you on a recent article. You said, "It's one-man politics, no different to dictatorship. The outcome is pushing China's party state further towards a one-man dictatorship. And that's the way we can see it." Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, as this is really a specialty of studies, Professor Wu? Floor is open to you.
Yeah, thanks, Martina. I also was an IJP fellow. I benefited a lot from IJP. Thank you a lot. In terms of China, under Deng Xiaoping policy, China had a lot of reforms compared with the Mao Zedong period. But now the issue is Xi Jinping tried to go back to Mao Zedong period. Then in his recent report, Xi Jinping really emphasized security as a top priority. Xi Jinping tried to create a war-like scenario in China. So he emphasized security instead of economic growth all the time. He tried to signal to domestic audience that China now is in crisis. He is somebody who can save all of people in China. Then in the meantime, he also is very much against United States. He tried to fight USA and also many Western countries using his wolf warrior diplomacy.
So you were using real harsh words. Like you said, Xi Jinping is saving the people in China. Is this, as you have got lots of insight, only his opinion? Is that really backed by the party? And do you think, is it also backed by the people in China?
I think if you look into some opinion data in China, we are not quite sure how much is about propaganda and how much is people's true feeling. But based on a lot of interaction between me and also some common people in China, a lot of people really support Xi Jinping. The reason is very simple. Propaganda really matter a lot. They argue that the Western countries try to jeopardize China. So now China need to stand up and also go against the Western country. Then they do have a lot of the misinformation, including COVID-19. Many of Chinese, if you look into some opinion survey data, they think COVID-19 it's because of United States kind of strategy to jeopardize China instead of looking into like their own health care problem. They will argue that most of problem are caused by United States.
Okay, it was like saying also what did we say? Caused by the United States. So is that a good sign for Europe that China is looking, Chinese government is looking for a more softer approach towards Europe? Can we profit from that? Or what kind of attitude do they have towards Europe?
I would say that go back to my point is Xi Jinping a little bit similar to Mao Zedong. He really emphasized everything. It's a kind of Chinese characters. So including recently, he talked about Chinese modernization. He does not actually refer to modernization according to like an international standard. So mostly he would think China is very unique. So China can rely on its own domestic market. So all people, particularly people from Europe, are relying on China's market. So I would say that overall, they have a similar attitude toward USA and Europe. But in the meantime, of course, they know that they could not actually fight everyone. So they would like to have some kind of a collaboration with the Europe. So that's the reason why German's chancellor switched to China. It's very, very important for China.
And was it only propaganda to say that it was important, because not really very much was said aside on the political level, aside from the economic delegation?
Yeah, propaganda actually matter a lot in China because after all, it's a socialism country. They rely propaganda a lot to try to boost the government's popularity. And also, to be frank, China's economy is not good now. A lot of lockdown still are ongoing. Some surveys suggest that China may have 30% of city locked down now. So in general, I would say that in the near future, economic outlook is not good. So, but in the meantime, propaganda machine will be much more active than before.
Gina, folks, we come to your question in a minute. I have just one more question to Professor Wu. You mentioned modernization and then being confronted with, of course, what he also addressed and the government addressed, geopolitical challenges. And she declared, we have to put our national interests first. But I'm sure he is a statesman who knows that modernization could not only be, come to reality if they just look inward. Is there a certain sense that they have to be open to other countries?
I would say
rest of the world.
Yeah, I would say modernization actually mean a lot. Not only about hard infrastructure, also it's about soft infrastructure. So basically, it will be about a lot of things like rule of law, press freedom, and also living condition. But in Xi Jinping's term, it's quite different. They are talking about something very different from Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping's period really emphasized open door policy will benefit China, but now they talk about internal circulation as a main channel in the party document. So they will much more rely on internal market instead of external market. But of course, they will not say that I would like to close the door. But in the meantime, you look into China's zero COVID strategy. Even you are very big business investors, if you want to go to China, you still need to go through quarantine. 10 days quarantine is not easy for everybody.
But we see numbers spiking again. Would that mean another complete close down of the country? Or do you think that there will be a certain kind of more moderate approach in the next weeks, months to come?
I don't see very optimistic sign at this moment because of in Xi Jinping's party report, he emphasized that we need to uphold the zero COVID strategy. So it means that the central government will not change the policy in the near future. The problem is when winter is coming, people stay indoor much more, then the virus could spread much substantially among population. The biggest concern is the rate among older people in China is not very high. In some cities, you can see like Shanghai, 40% of older people have not got the vaccine since the start of vaccination program in early 2021. So I'm not quite sure how far China...
Excuse me to interrupt you. Is that a failure of the government that they cannot convince people?
Exactly. A lot of health experts argue that if China can spend more money on vaccination instead of mass testing, then China's approach will be more sustainable. But China now still actually really want to have lockdowns and mass testing. So they have a lot of money with that instead of money with vaccination. But if you look into many countries' experience, including Singapore, vaccination is the only way to get out of COVID pandemic.
There's always a question coming up. Is also the lockdown of the country a good excuse for introducing more stricter and regulations and even more control on the people?
Yes, exactly. If you look into political aspect, if they try to do lockdown, now they also introduce health code. Health code means that if you have red code will mean that you have close contact with COVID patients. Then you cannot go out of your apartment. In some areas like Zhengzhou, recently they had some kind of dispute about mortgage issue in the financial sector. Then they basically lock everyone up using red code. They are not actually close contact or COVID patient, but they are locked up. So if you look into political aspect, they could utilize this system to tighten up internal control. So if they want to lock up people, they could do that easily compared with before.
Got it. Could we come to the Taiwan question, of course, as
Yes.
it's not only this topic, but you also have been very much into that topics. The delegates voted to enshrine opposition to Taiwan's independence, for sure, in the constitution. So after that, Taipei accused Beijing of maintaining an old mindset, and the tensions were rising. It was discussed all over the media, all over the world. So what is your opinion and that of your colleagues, how this will roll out in the next foreseeable future? Is that a real threat?
Yeah, I would say the Taiwan issue is very hot in the market because of many people just actually think about Taiwan issue. If the war between China and Taiwan occur, it may actually evolve into the very big war around the world. You know, US may join, then another country may join. So it will become very, very big, even bigger than the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But in the meantime, I would say that I don't think Xi Jinping want to fight the war in the near future. Although Xi Jinping tried to say that I'm the person can save the country, can actually get back Taiwan. But in the meantime, you also need to look at Xi Jinping's intention. Xi Jinping won fourth term. Xi Jinping also won the fifth term, if his health allow. So in the third term, I don't think he want the war to be happening very soon, because of everyone think Russia can invade Ukraine, and also Ukrainian will be defeated within 1 week. But if you look into the situation there, it almost lasts for many months. So I don't think China now actually have full confidence by taking over Taiwan within 1 or 2 days. So they need to rethink about the strategy in the near future. But of course, Xi Jinping always argued that he want to take back Taiwan using different means. In recent white paper about Taiwan, they still talk about the last resort will be with the war, but they don't say that they will actually invade Taiwan in the near future.
So if I interpret you right, the next 5 years, there will be lots of pressure on Taiwan psychologically. And now I come to Tina Fuchs' question. Will it also be like economic pressure and maybe cyber pressure? That's her question. What kind of pressure do you see instead of a real war breaking out?
Yes, Taiwan will be suffering. Then China will use a lot of strategy to harass Taiwan in the near future because of a lot of Chinese will think taking over Taiwan will be very big thing in history of PRC. So I guess from top and also from bottom up, everyone is particularly in China wants some sort of achievement, particularly over Taiwan Strait. But in the meantime, a lot of democracy also want to see Taiwan's success. Then I would say that Taiwan will be cheap and in between, but it really depends on how Taiwanese government react. If they react very nicely, they could actually tap into some opportunities. But if they react in a very, very bad way, if China side can leverage on that, then it will be very dangerous for Taiwan.
And that would mean it would also be naturally dangerous for South Korea, Japan, for surrounding countries. How is that seen? Will there be like a belt of other Asian countries supporting Taiwan, or do they only fear for their own future?
I would say that now South China Sea issue also is very hot. Mostly China is too big, it's a giant. I would say most countries just try to stay away from this issue, including Philippines, including South Korea, because they know that China is very big. Then China exercise wolf warrior diplomacy, they can use economic coercion. But in the meantime, I would say that we do hope some peaceful forces in this region could help to balance the power, particularly try to find some middle ground here. Otherwise, it will be a disaster for this region.
What could be a diplomatic, peaceful, more soft approach? What do you think? Because nice words won't, or diplomatic dialogue would not lead in the end to a peaceful resolution. What do you think?
I think it's not an easy task. You can see like a lot of people think people-to-people communication will be the best. Then the situation always could be improving. But you also can see in this region, like in ASEAN, like Myanmar's issue, a lot of countries want to, offer empathy to Myanmar people, but Myanmar now still is in a military rule. So the issue is sometimes if you face some forces like dictatorship, peaceful forces sometimes will feel very frustrated because of they have no idea how to actually talk to dictator. But the dictator can actually have all kind of advantage to fight peaceful maker. So I'm not quite sure how people can actually unite together and also to help to build a resilient Asia and also try to have a peaceful Taiwan Strait. But I hope everyone would think they have some interest there instead of stay away, then try to protect themselves.
Well, this is a very, I'd say, your time is up already, unfortunately. Well, a very interesting, not only insight, but takeaway for us on your opinion. We hope to see you again on one of the Asia Talks. Professor Wu, thanks a lot for tuning in. And now you go back to your students. Thanks a lot for being with us today. And yeah, we address now our next 30-35 minutes to Greg Stack from Merrick's being in Brussels.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Greg, could I just allow me a minute to introduce you a little bit more, because that was a shortcoming at the beginning of our talk, about you as a researcher on with a strong focus on EU-China relations. You have lived in Beijing for 5 years, if I'm correct, and you dig very much into institutional frameworks, strategic discourse deployed by the two sides like EU and China, and the EU's common foreign policy efforts. As we could not touch in depth in the beginning, really the EU-China and EU-Taiwan relations, I'd would like to leave the floor open to you for a few insights from your research. Greg, floor is open to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to join you today. So when it comes to those quick remarks, maybe let us start with some of the takeaways from the 20th Party Congress, what they mean for the EU and EU-China relations, and then happy to answer any questions related to German-China policy or, for example, Chancellor Scholz's visit. But to open up, the key takeaway from the European perspective from the 20th Party Congress is that security clearly was king. If we take a look at the work report that came from President Xi Jinping during this party Congress. Security was mentioned 91 times compared to 54 mentions in 2017. So we see a very big increase. Also, there was a new dedicated national security section in the work report that haven't been there before. New mentions of territorial security, ideological security, economic security, technological security, again, something that has not been present in the work reports before. And all of that should be also cross-referenced against the mentions of economy, as economy was only mentioned and referred 60 times compared to 91 security. And this is the very first time that security was mentioned more times than economy in the work report, which signifies change. Also, another takeaway, which is more general but relevant for Europe, is the question of personal changes. In the Politburo Standing Committee, we still have 7 members, but they are much more clearly politically aligned with Xi Jinping. They clearly have been selected more on the basis of political alignment and ideological conviction, not only on basis of technocratic credentials. And this is an important change that we see also in the wider Politburo. A number of important actors, such as, for example, Liu He, or even Li Keqiang himself, didn't even make it to the Politburo. If we think about if we think about actors such as those related to Communist Youth League clique or the Shanghai Gang related to Jiang Zemin, they're just out of the Politburo in many cases. So Politburo is much more centered around Xi Jinping. And part of this idea is that we need to securitize, as Professor Wu said, this is part of the kind of anxiety within the system, to my mind. And it largely is related, this insecurity translated into this more conservative move, centralizing and trying to gather the party around the core center that later also through ideology can unify the action in this huge organization. And this is also partially why ideology is becoming more and more important. And we see that in the statements related to the question of pressure for greater struggle and struggling spirit that comes from this work report. Also in the context of that being a primary criterion for selecting officials. So this is, let's say, a look on the domestic side of things. But if we take a look at the foreign relations aspect of the work report, which at the same time, again, work reports primarily focus on those domestic issues, but still on the international relations side, we have some signals. First of all, in 2017, there was still a mention that has been frequently appearing in the work reports that the overall evaluation of the international landscape from Chinese perspective has been about as one of an important strategic opportunity for development. In 2022, we have a different statement that strategic opportunity and risks and challenges coexist. So what that means is let's say, this might seem like a relatively obvious thing for us, that now risks and challenges are definitely on the rise, but there is this acknowledgement in the work report that is clearly mentioned. And in that context, we also see a shift when it comes to the in the part related to major power relations. So basically this whole model of major power relations that has been put largely to discuss relationship between China and the US. The word cooperation that was there in 2017 is by now out. And we have the mentions of peaceful coexistence and positive interactions, which is again a step down from the word cooperation. So again, it's relatively more pessimistic outlook looking from Beijing. So the goal of the Chinese side in this more, let's say, risky and more challenging environment, and the situation where the party prioritizes security, the idea is we need to change or reshape, adjust the international order in order to make it more secure for the party. Right. So the idea is that we need to adjust the institutions ideally without major conflicts erupting, because they're just not to the party's advantage. In the end of the day, China remains an actor that prefers low risk and rather controlled activities and approach to foreign policy, rather than taking high stakes, high risk, high risk, high reward approach, as it is in the case of Russia. So this idea of true multilateralism, building what we call with the colleagues at Merrick's, the coalition of the unsatisfied. So trying to find the cracks in the international system, whoever is unsatisfied, and trying to exploit those cracks in order to push China's agenda and move in the direction of making the international system more accepting and open to authoritarian governments, which again is about securing the stability of the regime in Beijing. So this pushes us in the direction of, again, systemic rivalry probably becoming more predominant or more pronounced. And also the signal about the potential increase of the, let's say, misunderstandings or battle of narratives, if you want to use the External Action Services vocabulary, between our vision of democracy and also China's approach of the whole process people's democracy, which is this concept based on consultative democracy that is so closely linked to communist systems. In the context of Taiwan, what appeared in the work report, Taiwan appeared much earlier than it usually does. It appeared in the first section, and then once again in the 13th section of the work report, which is dedicated to Hong Kong and Taiwan normally, but this time Taiwan was referenced earlier, largely in the connection to the tensions surrounding Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, and this followed. So it was at the same time, not that much new was mentioned in the work report when it comes to Taiwan, because in the context of that visit, just in August, we have seen Beijing releasing a white paper focused on Taiwan. So the new policy has been announced already. But what was relevant in the context of Taiwan is that the wording in the CCP's constitution, which is a very important document, this is something that we really have to pay attention to, changed from something around the words of engaging with our Taiwanese compatriots in order to bring about peaceful reunification to quote, resolutely opposing and deterring separatists seeking Taiwan independence. Again, a much stronger warning and the wording in the document. And this is also linked to the fact that, as Xi Jinping said, China prefers peaceful reunification, but if that turns out not to be an option, or the separatist movements in Taiwan or international pressure and international interference becomes too strong, China reserves the right to using military force. So where all of this puts us Europe, in that context. So First of all, what we're going to see is a more centralized and more ideological Beijing. Like this direction is consolidated. Largely, the Congress has been about continuation, consolidating Xi's position and continuation of the policies. So there's going to be just less flexibility on the side of the Chinese counterparts in their interactions with European officials and European governments. They're going to have to tiptoe the official line much more closely, even more so than before. And that already has been a problem in the relations. Also, as we discussed before, there are now no moderates in the key leading positions. So this has been a point very often referenced by European actors that are, let's say, more inclined to engagement, informed engagement with the Chinese side, which was about amplifying and supporting the voices of moderates within the party. Now, as they are not in the position of power, this is just simply no longer possible. So we don't have those moderates as counterparts. And largely this question of ideology is just another problem, simply because what we've seen with zero COVID, that has been this kind of ideological, primarily ideologically and politically driven engagement, is that to a large extent, the relationship between Europe and China for many years has been based on this assumption from the European side that China fundamentally is a rational actor in the economic sense of the word. So China is going to prioritize, and the party is going to prioritize the economic growth and economic progress as means for securing legitimacy, all of that. And so in the end of the day, where they're going to make economy-based decisions. And this is where we can seek engagement, even though there are those differences between us. Now, with the takeaways from this party Congress and what we've seen coming from Xi Jinping over those last years, this is put into question. Is this more ideological and political security-minded China that we're seeing emerging over those last years and very clearly emphasized during the Congress? How do we find a room to actually work together? Can we even? And what is the basis of that? What are the costs? What are the downsides? So there is a very big question that we need to ask ourselves as the EU. On the more international level, and that's linked to the whole question of the primary fear of the containment on the Chinese side, the US-led containment, coalition building, this type of activity. And this leads me to the whole question of how the European side, largely, to my mind, we're also doing a lot of tracking of discussions among the Chinese think tankers and as much as possible the discussions that are unfolding on the Chinese side. Generally speaking, China needs Europe for three instances, and this is time sensitive, let's say. One of it, and key aspect of this relationship from Beijing's perspective, is the question of preventing containment. So as much as possible, trying to prevent the EU joining into the US-led coalitions that might be targeting Beijing's position. Second of all is access to European technology. And this is something that becomes more and more pronounced as the US is introducing very strong measures for limiting access, for example, to semiconductors and trying to cripple China's technological capabilities. So keeping the door open to Europe is just important here. And finally, it's also about the question of European market. And we shouldn't overestimate our importance in the long run, because largely most of Chinese activities, if we take a look either at Belt and Road Initiative, at Global Development Initiative, they're largely, and also general reach out and engagement with the Global South, which is partially about the numbers game in the multilateral system, to just have the numbers, to change it and kind of secure the interest with limited costs. But second of all, it's also about those growing markets. Once China is in the position to have the markets and the demand for its production abroad as well in the developing countries, there's going to be much less of a sway that the European market is going to have, and much less need for access to Europe in general. So this is also something where we're on let's say on a specific time schedule, because systemic rivalry and this more ideological approach is simply coming to the optics or to the forefront, as we've seen also during the party congress. So those would be the few opening points. Maybe one more final one before I hand it over to you, Martina, would be about the question of China-Russia, because largely what we see is that as Beijing has this ambition of changing the international order to make it more secure for CCP and the authoritarian actors, and also to simply create the space and position for its growth growth of its power and importance on the international landscape, it needs allies, or allies is too strong of a word, but let's say those that also are seeking to change the international order. We are not the partner for that. US is not the partner for that. G7 is not the partner for that. Who remains in terms of relatively big or powerful players? It's clearly Russia and India as important actors in that context, and we all know how complicated the relationship between China and India is, and also, again, engagement with developing countries. But this is why China, feeling itself being in the predestined, thinking in Marxist historical terms, confrontation between China and US, that basically leads to a conclusion that you cannot really abandon Russia, because much of the thinking is that once the quote unquote West is done with Russia, then all of the attention is going to shift to containing or acting on China. And with this deficit of strategic trust, keeping the relationship with Russia to a certain extent is a must. So we really should be cautious about this kind of ideas of any sort of moderation or mediation coming from the Chinese side in terms of approach to Russia, with one caveat that for sure, as much as we shouldn't expect for Beijing to abandon Moscow, there is definitely no interest on the Chinese side in Russia using nuclear weapons. I wouldn't personally necessarily call it a red line for Beijing, and happy to unpack this if that is of interest. But this is definitely something that Beijing would prefer not to see, if possible. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if Russia uses, let's say, tactical weapons or a dirty bomb, that this would mean that China effectively abandons Russia very, very quickly. But on this very unoptimistic, and generally speaking, after this unoptimistic intervention, I'm passing it over to you, Martina.
Thanks so much. Well, there's so many aspects that are really of high interest. The last seems to be very mind-boggling, I have to say, from your perspective, because you do lots of research in that. This complicated, and then we come to Taiwan, China-Russia relationship, is that also a mistrust due to historical reasons, or has it developed just in recent times?
Definitely the relationship between China and Russia comes with a very big historical baggage. So right. that's definitely there. And there is this lack of trust in both ways, partially also because both of the sides tend to perceive international relations in a very realist, power-minded, power dynamics fashion, very much in a zero-sum game. So in that sense, you know, China doesn't really have allies, right? The only alliance that Beijing has is with North Korea. And that's only because in order to kind of mitigate or let's say provide North Korea with enough security, not for it not to do something totally unexpected. So that's definitely the case. But when we take a look at the actions that Beijing has taken since the beginning of the invasion, we've seen, for example, increase in trade but not increase in investment coming from the Chinese side. The investment to Russia has effectively dropped significantly. And what it tells us is that Beijing pursues this low-cost support for Russia, not really wanting to put too much, because with trade, you already get the revenue, right? So if at some point you have to stop it, you've already made your gains. With investment, it's very different, because then you enter the country, and if the situation goes south, the country goes bankrupt or anything of those sorts, you're going to be losing all this investment to a certain extent. So this is then a much stronger commitment that China would have signaled, but it decided not to do that. What we've seen is a lot of narrative support. So all of those situations, and again, for example, related to Chancellor Scholz's visit, right? The headlines around the world where Xi Jinping suddenly criticizes Russia. That's not exactly the case. If you read the Chinese readout, it's not necessarily directly linked to Ukraine. That's the first thing. Second of all, those are exactly the points that China consistently makes in the United Nations about general opposition to usage of nuclear weapons. So it's not exactly new. It's new that it came from Xi Jinping, of course, but just to point out how strong is this commitment, when Charles Michel was supposed to give a pre-recorded video address to import forum in China, just I think yesterday or 2 days ago. It was scrapped by the Chinese side specifically because it included a message related opposing the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that was referenced supposedly as the cause for that. So there is not really a change. And similarly, what I mean with the question of the red lines is like, we can relatively easily imagine a situation in which if Russia uses, for example, a dirty bomb somewhere within the territory of Ukraine, nothing would stop Beijing from saying, oh, it's a fog of war. We don't really know for certain. Opinions are divided. We oppose, of course, the usage of this type of weapons, but we would need a dedicated, unbiased and unpolitical commission. So basically, not really one driven by the quote-unquote West that would look into those issues more closely and basically use the same rhetorical tools that China has used in the context of COVID. Again, I don't think we can expect too much of a political pressure coming from Beijing. There's probably going to remain a narrative support for Russia and narratives that are coming from it. At the same time, again, I do believe that Beijing is trying to signal to Russia that it would prefer not to see any nuclear actions, simply because it's hard to predict the fallout from this kind of direction. And again, Beijing tends to be a more of a risk-averse actor.
And besides, it would destroy those weak dependencies to Europe, and definitely would affect their Belt and Road initiative for sure, because that is already harmed by the current war. There is a question in the chat by Sonja Wagenbrenner. Can you read or should I read it aloud, Greg?
If you could maybe read it aloud, that would be
helpful. Just today, German government forbade a Chinese company to invest in the German semiconductor company Almost, yes, in Düsseldorf. Do you think that is a wise move? And how much should decisions like these be more decided on a European level?
Thank you very much for the question. So the whole question of, let's say, national security in investment and economic security in Chinese investments across Europe are, of course, a very, very problematic issue. largely because in the end of the day, national security is a prerogative of the member states. So even if we, just a few years back, we had the announcement of the foreign direct investment screening mechanism, everybody being very happy with that coming to fruition. But this is all still largely a very consultative mechanism. It's not really that the EU level, that the Commission could, for example, forbade any country from taking one decision or another. Generally speaking, when it comes to limiting Chinese access to European technology, this is definitely the direction that we should be thinking about. Now, as I haven't had a chance to read yet about today about this specific acquisition, it's hard for me to comment on the details of this specific case. But it's similarly, a larger question, like with the question of a terminal in the port of Hamburg that has been a very big debate, right? It's important that we get always into the nitty-gritty of this kind of actions, because the headlines very often going and pushback against a huge investment in the port of Hamburg. It was an investment into the smallest of the 4 terminals within the port, 24.9% after the pushback from 6 ministries and the Commission was the agreed limits, and this didn't give the voting rights to COSCO. Now, there are still problems with this kind of decisions, which are not only about the question of our economic security, because Chinese actors very often are linked to the entire integrated supply chain in a way that our companies simply are not, because we have a different approach. And the problem with COSCO in that specific investment is about the fact that COSCO is not only an operator of terminals, but also a company that actually moves and transport things. So you're basically bringing in, as an operator of the port, there is an interest on the side of Port of Hamburg to get more COSCO shipments passing through the port, which economically, yes, it's good that more of that would be happening. At the same time, again, that gives China greater potential leverage.
And excuse me to interrupt, but it would also be a sign of saying we depend on you from the German respective EU, because transportation is it's one of the big harbors, a hub. It would signal, yes, we are dependent on you, China, right?
Exactly, and that's also part of the problem with that investment and with this the whole question of political optics. I mean, that specific investment came just before Chancellor's visit to China, which is also slightly counterintuitive in the sense of this could have been a bargaining chip to be used rather than a gift announced before the visit. That's also one of the questions. But more generally speaking, at the time when we're discussing and pushing for the question of lower dependence on China, and this is clearly on top of the agenda right now. So the question of dependence in mitigating dependence in strategic supply chains, in strategic sectors, is it really the right moment to make this kind of decisions and this kind of moves? Now, at the same time, we also have to be aware that we are at the moment where the European economy is facing very high inflation. We're ahead of the very tough winter. So it's also a question, is it the moment that we want to pick up another fight with China exactly now, when we're already in one fight with Russia? But definitely, while this kind of decisions can make sense in the short term, they are problematic in the medium term and in the long term, simply because we give China more leverage, and seeing how China is evolving and how the thinking in the party is evolving, because we should remember that it's not just about Xi Jinping himself. He is an emanation of a certain movement in the party. It's not exactly just one-man show. So this direction is likely going to stay, and the usage of economic coercion tools is probably going to be part of China's toolbox.
Would China use this toolbox also for, like, saying, South Korea, Japan, other countries surrounding Taiwan and Philippines, and therefore surrounding the Taiwan question as well.
Definitely. I mean, in the question of economic coercion, we've already seen that in the fallout of Nancy Pelosi's visit in the context of Taiwan with targeting of specific goods, but also in Australia in terms of cooperation on exports of coal or wine. In the past, we've seen that also in the context of Norway with the exports of salmon, but even more intensely in the context of Lithuania. So, you know, the question is not if, the question is whether China will be willing to target increasingly more strategic sectors, because a lot of those moves that Beijing has taken so far, if we think, for example, about salmon, you know, as much as important for a specific section of the Norwegian economy, it's not really a strategic good. When it comes to the actions towards Lithuania, Lithuania again had such a small exchange with China that it's not necessarily such a huge move. The bigger problem there was about the fact that China was trying to coerce, especially German businesses, to cut out Lithuanian products from their supply chains for exports to China. So generally speaking, this is largely a problem that is not hypothetical, the question of Chinese coercion, and we should be increasingly mindful of that. The debate now rages not about the question of whether we should be limiting the dependence on China, but about what do we mean by that? So you have one group of people that would be in favor of pursuing a more targeted diversification away from China. So basically only moving away in strategic sectors, whatever they might be, because that's still up for discussion and debate. And here, for example, Chancellor Scholz's idea of smart diversification is effectively along those lines. Or a different group of people that would be more about diversifying from China away in general, period. So this is still a very, very important market that we cannot ignore. It's still a huge economy, but we should be mindful of the possibility of economic coercion coming in any of the sectors effectively.
As you said, it leaves room open to tricks to sneak in from the Chinese side. Everybody is interested on your perspective, or there's one last question. Oh, yeah, maybe we have 2 more minutes. Tina Fuchs is asking, can you compare the European stand in Africa compared to the Chinese? And it is being said that China has a long-term plan and Europe has none. Is there an awareness in European politics? Work on that.
Thank you. So generally speaking, I'll try to, as we have the limited time, to kind of keep it very, very concise. But the European thinking right now when it comes to greater engagement goes through the idea of the Global Gateway project or Global Gateway initiative that has been in the works for well over a year now, close to a year and a half, with the idea being of trying to respond or provide alternatives to, for example, Belt and Road Initiative. This is part of the framing in this discussion. And it's also about greater engagement with developing countries, be it in Africa, in Southeast Asia, or in Latin America. This is still very much up in debate, debated. The file of Global Gateway, which was initially discussed primarily as a geopolitical tool and a geopolitical framing for huge development activity and engagement that the EU already has. Because if we take a look at the EU and, for example, compare our activities that are already there on the ground for many, many years, we are the biggest donor of development aid in the world. And if you compare that to BRI, with Chinese investments being primarily credited. So it's providing a credit line to the countries rather than making any donations and actually building along those lines. Part of the problem with the work that is being done on Global Gateway right now is that there is still a question what specific projects will be involved. How well is it also going to be framed in terms of engagement? Because partially you could make an argument that what we need is not more activity on development, but more activity on business. So partially it's about the power dynamic between the EU and its partners, because we have to still remember the dark legacy of colonialism in the European case. And this is also a problem if we treat our partners as those in need of development and of development financing that we are extending, rather than the partners to who we say, we're coming here to make business, we're coming here to help you develop, and there is also something in it for us. It's a much more partner-based relationship on eye to eye. We sit together, we discuss those things. So this remains a problem, a framing on the European side. The specific funding was announced on the European side, but in the typical EU fashion, half of it is supposed to be provided by the Commission and half of it to materialize from the private sector following those initial incentives. So this is all very much up in the air, but the question of diversification and greater engagement with Africa and generally speaking with developing countries is definitely now one of those very important files in Brussels.
Rex, thank you so much. We have much more extended our time. One last question. I'd like to get a short answer. Do you see in the foreseeable future a united strategy of the European countries towards China?
Well, I would say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that we theoretically have this kind of common framing, right? The strategic outlook from 2019, which sees China as a cooperation partner, economic competitor, and systemic rival at the same time. So theoretically, a kind of framework for the European approach is there. The problem with this approach is that it's all-encompassing and it doesn't really tell you what are our real strategic priorities vis-a-vis China. And that's part of the problem. In that sense, I don't see us moving away from the three-pronged approach simply on the basis that you have such a diversity of voices among the EU capitals in terms of how we should approach China, that changing that would require so much time, political capital. It's a question of whether it's worth it when we already have a kind of framework for European China policy that is flexible enough that we can move in this more assertive direction in any case without changing that. At the same time, so that would be to a slight exchange and no. When it comes to the yes, we have this framework, and within that, what I think we should be doing and what we maybe will be able to see. In 2019, the strategic outlook was released together with a list of 10 goals that the EU is supposed to pursue in its relationship with China. Concrete, it's a kind of a 10-point action plan of goals, what to work on. And I would think that what we may see is a revision of those points. So to not necessarily revising the entire strategy, because in the end of the day, this would just cost too much, but going on this more, let's say, midterm tactical, if you will, level with those new actions. Because in the end of the day, the common European China policy it's a fig leaf, simply on the basis that China is so prevalent in so many aspects of foreign policy that in order for us to have a common China policy, we would have to have a common foreign policy, period. And that's not happening without the change of the treaties. And this is not something that I think we can expect in the foreseeable future.
I think full stop point. Thank you so much. The takeaway from this session today is we are going to have a follow-up, I'd rather say, because there's still so much to talk about. Thank you very much to all participants, and thank you especially to you, Greg, for staying overtime. It was great talking to you. And for those who are interested, the next AsiaTalk will be upcoming Wednesday, and we will have two journalists German journalists currently based in Taiwan, who will speak about those topics that don't make it to the German media. What is interesting there, politics, arts, history, indigenous people, perception of the young generation towards the new China approach towards its own island, and so many topics more to talk about. So if you'd like to tune in next week, Wednesday, 12 o'clock. And again, thank you so much, Gregory, for staying with us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.